Hello. I think, yeah, we're already live. Okay. Hello and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers. I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. Apologies for the late start, any of you who were here and waiting. I typically don't schedule clients during the hour prior to this, the noon hour on Wednesday, Central Time. And we recently switched to a new scheduling software, and for some reason, it allowed a client to schedule during that time. So I had to run to the restroom and pour a glass of water, which any of you who ever wonder why therapy sessions are scheduled to be 50 minutes long instead of a full 60 minutes long, that's why sometimes we need to run to the restroom and grab a glass of water. Good to be here with you all. This is the This Is Not Therapy Hour. It's just an open conversation. Whoever is here, and particularly those of you who are here in chat, what you say, you're part of the conversation. You ask questions, I'm going to try and answer them. You say things, I'm going to respond. I always pick a topic to start with. Today, as we discussed last week, I have a list of questions to address from a webinar I gave last week on anxiety, specifically to the, I forget the name exactly of the organization, but Association for People with Neurofibromatosis. So that's the topic we're going to start with. Is I'm just going to go through all the questions that we got but didn't have time to address during the webinar so that we can record and share it with those people. But those of you who are here, Bast Insider, welcome. You're still here and you're still part of this. So what you say and what you ask will also happen as well. I'm going to jump right into it, but I got to find, there it is. Thank you to Zoe, for Zoe Verdon, who is our director of operations, who put all this together for me. So just as a brief recap for those of you here today on anxiety, the way that I find it useful to talk about anxiety, because I'm sure I'll reference a lot of this as I answer the questions, trying to replicate as much as I can of what was said in the webinar last week. Anxiety means a lot of different things. And I don't just mean it's different things to different people, although that's true. I mean, it's a word that is used in many different ways. And one of those is to talk about anxiety as a condition. I have anxiety, anxiety as a biological state, right? That whether it's a diagnosed condition or whatever, that I am going to feel anxious, I have anxiety, doesn't necessarily mean all the time right now in this moment I am experiencing anxiety. It can mean I believe that I am more likely to be anxious in response to things, or even I believe that I will be anxious for no reason at all other than random biology things that are happening that I can't really observe. Sometimes people will talk about anxiety in terms of more of a personality trait. I'm an anxious person, as opposed to I have an anxiety condition, in which case they're talking about, yes, they think they are more likely to respond to something in a way that we could define as anxious than perhaps the normal person, average person is, their concept of that person. We are talking about anxiety as an experience, meaning I am in this moment anxious, not a descriptor of me, but talking about what is happening right now. And that in that case, anxiety has both a physical component and a cognitive component. That I feel something in my body. For me, Brandon, in particular, when I'm feeling anxious, almost always I will feel a sense of pressure right here below the sternum. But that same sense of pressure, I also experience that when I'm very excited or very happy about something that just happened. So it can't just be that. What we're doing, what the brain is always doing, is looking for markers to identify things. If I say a dog is a creature with 4 legs and a tail, well, then you look at a lion and I have to say, okay, 4 legs and a tail, and it has this, and it barks, or whatever, right? That we get more and more specific. So anxiety, as well as pretty much all emotional things, anything that we can observe as an emotional state, has a physical sensation or multiple physical sensations, also a cognitive component. Sometimes, especially with anxiety, but this can happen with any emotion, sometimes I read or observe the physical sensations in my body without the cognitive piece added on at first, except as soon as I notice those physical sensations and identify them, consciously identify them as anxiety or whatever else, then immediately at that point, the question becomes, why am I anxious? And I'm going to think about it because there has to be that cognitive element. If I'm identifying it as anxiety, then at least if nothing else, I'm anxious about the fact that I'm anxious without knowing why. And I'll think through it until I either find something to land on and say, oh, that's why I'm anxious, whether it's accurate or not to why I'm feeling what I'm feeling doesn't matter. Or that I will continue to be, like we just said, anxious about the fact that I'm feeling anxious without being able to identify why, which is also a thought. I'm anxious, but why? So always both. And in particular, I'll reiterate, I say this all the time, everything that I'm offering is always in addition to, not instead of, not to replace other things. There are many, many ways of talking about anxiety. There are many, many ways of talking about things that can be helpful to either cope with it or prevent it or reduce how often it happens or how bad it is when it does. I'm going to talk about some specific ones. That doesn't mean that I think other ones are bad. I would never waste my resources trying to take away something from someone that is unhelpful. But if the ways that you know about talking about anxiety have not been helpful to you, then I want you to have this new way that might be helpful and allow you to let go of the other unhelpful ones. It's different for different people. We don't have to have a big war here about what is correct, because there isn't a correct. It is whatever works. We care about utility, not accuracy. I feel like a hollow mannequin filled with bees sometimes. Yeah. And that's a great example. Anything we're talking about that is about an internal subjective experience, we're using language to map concepts against the experience so that we can share, we can communicate about it, because we, for some reason, and there are many, many good reasons, have found utility in communicating about it. But even if I say, oh, I also feel like a hollow mannequin filled with bees sometimes, that's also what anxiety is like for me, it's still not going to be exactly the same experience. And if somebody says that I feel like a hollow mannequin filled with bees sometimes, which is a very fun way to define it, and that's not your experience of anxiety, that doesn't mean that what you're experiencing isn't anxiety, or that what they're experiencing isn't anxiety. It can be like that for them and like something else for you, because anxiety, while it involves biological processes and physiological responses, and there are certain universal experience or commonalities between things, it is a construct. All of these things, every emotion, anything that we are doing when we're talking about something happening internally is a construct. That doesn't mean that it's fake. It means that we have noticed something and it's complex. And so we need to build some container for that. So if we're talking about anxiety, then I am putting into the container that I call anxiety whatever it's useful for me to put into that container. And you're doing the same. To whatever extent they match up, great, that enables you and I to communicate about it more efficiently. To whatever extent they don't match up, not a problem, because they don't have to be the same. It's about what we've found useful. Because honestly, although I do sometimes feel like a hollow mannequin filled with bees, I usually wouldn't call that anxiety. I would usually call that feeling something like, I'm feeling antsy. I need to move. I'm feeling, and she might not be, I'm assuming Allie Ward, that to me seems like a name that would associate with she, her pronouns, but maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe she's not talking about it in such a physical sense like I am, where I do feel a physical sense of like, gotta move. Maybe it's more of a way of describing the cognition. Yeah, thank you. That's nice. So the first thing that I am offering or did offer in that webinar that might be helpful is that I talk about anxiety. I find utility in talking about anxiety as the gap between how important it is to me that a certain thing go a certain way, or that a certain thing not go a certain way, which is that fear kind of anxiety. The gap between that and how likely I think it is that that thing will go that way. The more important and the less confident, the less likely I think it is, the less confident I am that it will go that way, the more my anxiety grows. Which means that in order to decrease the experience of anxiety, we want to either somehow make the thing less important, somehow make it seem more likely or increase our confidence that it will go the way we want, or both. And it doesn't matter which side we choose. So depending on what it is that I'm anxious about, sometimes it's easier to do this, sometimes this, whatever works. Yeah, it's a lot of it is about awareness of possibility, but we have a lot of questions to get to, so I'm not going to get into a lot of that, but I did share that in the webinar, so I'll be referencing that potentially as I answer these. I haven't read these questions before. How can we help our children with NF identify anxiety they may be feeling when they do not know exactly what anxiety is? Wow, okay. That is very relevant to everything we were just saying, so I don't know if there's a way when we edit this to kind of pull some of that into it, but I'll repeat some of that. What anxiety is, right? I just gave a definition of it that I find to be useful, but I also gave a bunch of other definitions that other people find, and I also find those to be useful. It's just I'm focusing on this one because the one that I'm offering now is not one that I hear other people talking about. They may be, I just don't hear it. So what we're saying is not that they're experiencing something called anxiety and we need to help them identify it. What we're doing is offering those kids the language, the word anxiety, to map it against something that they might be experiencing, something that we think they might be experiencing. We think it will be useful to them to be able to call something that they're experiencing anxiety. So we start with that. We want to emphasize that there isn't a correct and incorrect way to identify what anxiety is. Because if we start with this idea that anxiety is this and nothing else, then we create anxiety in people about whether what they're experiencing is anxiety. Am I anxious? I don't know. Other people talk about anxiety and say it's really, really bad and they can, short of breath and whatever. And I'm not short of breath. So maybe this isn't anxiety. Maybe this is something else. And that's fine. But also you can just say, I need a word for this feeling that I'm experiencing, and anxiety is a good one that I can use for this. From the outside, you're going to see things that we're going to call markers, like I was saying before, physical things. Markers, meaning pieces of information that we think identify something as something. Particularly, there's talking about perception sets and all this stuff, but we don't need to get into all the ridiculous jargon details. Just means when you're watching someone and you think they might be experiencing anxiety, or you're thinking about someone and you think they might be experiencing anxiety, it's not that you're right or wrong. There's something you're paying attention to, something you're picking up on, and you're finding potential utility in calling it anxiety. So there's no other bar that needs to be passed in order to share that with the child. You just say to them, okay, I think you might be anxious. What I'm seeing you do, what I'm hearing, what I think might be happening sounds to me like what we call anxiety. And then they say, oh, what is that? And you say something like, well, different people use it differently, but usually it means something like you're really worried about something that might happen in the future, but you don't know if it will or if it won't. Either you really don't want it to happen or you really do want it to happen. And you're so worried about it that it's kind of like bothering you. It's not just a thought, it's something that you're feeling. It's uncomfortable, it's unpleasant. And of course, whatever specific language you have with the kid, you want to use that. So that's one way, if they ask, what is anxiety? Another way is to say, I think you might be experiencing anxiety. And if they say, what do you mean, what's anxiety? Then you can just say in response, well, I don't really know. Why don't you tell me more about what you're experiencing? What are you thinking about right now? I don't care whether so much it's anxiety or not, just what are you thinking? And what are you feeling in your body? Check in with yourself. Are your muscles tense? And you can throw things out that you think might either generally be associated with anxiety or that you're noticing in them that is making you think they might be anxious? Well, I'm noticing you bite your nails a lot. And usually when I've seen you bite your nails a lot, it means that you're worried about something. So you can either offer the definition and then kind of clarify from there, or you can just say, tell me more about what you're experiencing. And either way, it's not done after that initial thing. Either way, from there, you modify it, both in that conversation. Okay, anxiety is this, child. And they say, yeah, no, it's not. It's not that. It's more like, it's this. Or, yeah, that's kind of it, but I don't feel that part. Or no, that's completely off. Whatever. We modify it. And not just then, but ongoing, the next conversation and the next conversation. Because the point of it is, with all this language, the point of it is for people to be able to observe themselves. Like you're saying, how do we help our children identify anxiety they may be feeling when they don't know exactly what anxiety is? We take it away from anxiety being a thing. It's just a combination of thoughts and sensations in the body, because those things they're aware of. If you say, are you feeling anxious? I don't know. If you say, what are you thinking? Well, I'm thinking this and that. What do you feel in your body? What do you feel in your chest? What do you feel in your stomach? What do you feel in your legs? Well, I'm feeling this or that. So once we establish the language, that's when it becomes useful to identify what things we are calling anxiety. Or, after I have a concept of what anxiety is, I know what that word means and I can use it, then I can start to track, oh, these kinds of things, I'm noticing a pattern. When this happens or when I think about this, I feel anxious. In other words, another very important part of this is that we're not looking at cause and effect relationships. You're not experiencing what you're experiencing because you have anxiety. You're experiencing anxiety, and then that creates all the other stuff. You're experiencing what you're experiencing, and we're calling it anxiety because it is useful to call it anxiety. That doesn't mean it's not a real thing. It's not to minimize it or take it away. It is a real thing. Everything is that we're experiencing, they're real, they're valid, even constructs and even arbitrary constructs. It's just that the words we come up with to match what we're experiencing, not the words are something that we don't experience that then causes our experience. So we look at patterns. Seems like I get anxious with this kind of stuff. I get anxious about this kind of stuff in these situations. And then we can start to address it more and more. I'll move on to the next question. My daughter has NF and her plexiform tumor growth has stopped progressing with, I'm not probably going to pronounce this correctly, Cosalugo. This is great, but then it's the insurance that is so anxiety inducing. Every year you have to be approved. Also, she gets older. Will she have the coverage she needs? I am going to stop myself from ranting and railing against the insurance system and how terrible it is, because honestly, whoever asked this question has a way better sense of how terrible the insurance system is than I do. You don't need to hear that from me. That last piece, when we're talking about anxiety, that last piece is what we're talking about. Will she have the coverage that she needs? So on that likelihood part, right? How important is it that she get the medical attention and the coverage that she needs? Highly, incredibly, maximum importance. It doesn't get more important than your child's healthcare, right? How likely is it is something that changes. Our perception of how likely it is changes based on the things that we experience. So every time the insurance gives you the runaround, you are going to worry more about whether it will be there when you need it in the future. Every time the insurance works well, you'll worry less about it being there when you need it in the future. Here's what can help, because as much as I wish I could say, oh, yeah, insurance will definitely be, I don't know. And I don't know what specific things might be the problem, and neither do you. That's why we're feeling anxious about it. It's the uncertainty. If we knew exactly what it was, which is often what people are asking me questions about, they're basically saying, remove the uncertainty for me so that I'm no longer anxious. And sometimes I can help with that. And sometimes I can't. I can never remove it completely. I could maybe string a certain series of words together that would make you feel as though there's no uncertainty, but there's still uncertainty no matter what. And if you think about it deeply enough, you'll find it anywhere. That's part of the reason anxiety it doesn't have to meet a certain bar or criteria. It's not only about certain kinds of things. If you say that you're anxious about whether it's going to rain later in the day, I don't need to say, no, that's not anxiety. That's just nerves or whatever. If you call it that, great. And we don't want to diminish people's experiences or discourage them from communicating about those experiences with us. If they say it's anxiety, great. Tell me more. Anyway, back to this. I can't say what will happen or what won't happen, of course, and neither can you, and that's why we're uncertain and anxious. What I can offer you, though, that might be helpful is that the brain disproportionately pays attention to negative experiences, meaning every time the insurance causes you a problem, you are going to notice it. You have to. That's what a problem is. It's something that you are actively noticing that is getting in the way of, or that is different than what you want to be happening instead, or that you're thinking might happen that is different than how you want it to happen instead. But every time something goes well, sometimes we notice when things go well. The vast majority of the time we don't, because we can't. We have finite resources. We can only be aware of so much. I cannot at all times be conscious of the fact that the building is not on fire and I'm not, I don't know, falling off of a building. I don't know. I can't be aware of the fact that, oh, I don't need to use the bathroom right now. Why would I spend my resources on that? So, what you can do to try and deal with some of that anxiety for you about whether the insurance will be there in the future is pay close attention to all of your interactions with the insurance company. Because if, let's say, in a day you have 100 experiences total, yeah, gravity still works, how fortuitous. That is actually usually my go-to example. I don't know why I didn't use that one, but we're at all times making an assumption that gravity is not going to cease to function in 30 seconds. It's not an active thing you do to make an assumption. If I didn't assume that, I would be behaving differently than I am, right? Anyway, pay attention to all of the interactions with the insurance, because if in a given day, let's say in a given moment, we'll just focus on visual data. If in a moment you can see 100 things in your field of view, but you only have the attention, the resources to be actually aware, notice 5 of those things. If 3 of those 100 things might kill you, you will notice those 3 things. And then the other 2 that you notice are going to be something, could be any of the other 97, right? But you walk away thinking, okay, 60% of that was deadly, even though actually only 3% of it was deadly. So every time the insurance, and believe me, I'm not a fan of insurance and how this whole system works. Every time the insurance messes with you, causes you a problem, you will notice it. Every time it works okay, you might notice it. If you put conscious intention into tracking all of them, all of those interactions, every time it happens, you journal just a quick note, such and such date, insurance reimbursed, whatever, no problem. Such and such date, blah, blah, blah. Then you'll get a better sense of what's accurate as opposed to just what you're noticing. It may still be that, no, it's the vast majority of the time it's a problem, but it may not. And even if it is still that, you have so much more information now because you're paying such close attention, including to the times that it works. You're going to notice and remember more information about what happened in those times that it works. And that stuff might be helpful to you in a future problem. Is a big part of what we do. Well, I was going to say in therapy, but really just all across the board that's helpful is we don't tend to notice when things go well. We want to consciously make ourselves notice when things go well so that later when it's a problem, we know what we did the last time. Will it always work again the same way? No, but it's more information and it might, depending on how similar it is to the last time. One, taking it off of just the specific question of insurance, one like common thing I recommend to people is to ritualize gratitude, to make some space, some time to make sure that you are going through and consciously identifying things that are good or have been good that day. And a lot of people already do this with meditative practices or prayer or journaling or whatever at the end of the day. I think the end of the day is a good time to do it. I also think there's a reason that we have things like Thanksgiving, that there are many cultural experiences centered around gratitude. In particular, with my children, at the end of every day, I do, let's each say 3 things that we liked from that day, so that we remember at least 3 things that we liked. I hope things get better and better. And this isn't just about perception. You can also, when things work, if it's a problem at first, and then you figure out how to make things work by getting in touch with an organization like this one that put on the webinar, or talking to somebody else who might know, or you've learned a new, you go online and find an article, whatever you end up finding that might help, you want to record that too. Because anxiety in this case, it's not just that you're disproportionately paying attention to the bad stuff. The other thing is, if I think that I have more tools in my toolbox to deal with the problem when it arises, I'll be less concerned. In other words, the importance comes down. If the problem comes up, I know what to do with it. It means that it's not so important whether the problem comes up anymore. Next question. I have regular plastic surgery for excision of plexiform in different areas of my body. I'm scheduled for a procedure on my facial and neck area this coming July. The thought of scheduling these procedures is very stressful and yes, makes me anxious. I also went through a major surgery. I'm going to skip some of the details. The thought that I might have to go through it again makes me anxious too. So this gets into trauma, the relationship between anxiety and trauma. And I want to be very careful with using that word, because everything that we've been saying about anxiety also applies to the word trauma, that how we use it is what matters, whether it is useful to you to use it in that way. And like with anxiety, but it's even more intense usually with trauma, if somebody else uses the word to mean something different than what you mean, they find utility in thinking of trauma as this, and then you come along and you're using the word trauma to talk about this, which is different than what they're using it to describe, then they have incentive, they have reason to say, no, that's not trauma. How dare you try and co-opt the word? And that's fine. Nobody's doing anything wrong in that situation. Everybody has reasons to do what they're doing. I'm just clarifying this all because a lot of what we were just talking about in the last question, that things that happen, things that you notice happen, affect your anxiety about similar things happening or not happening in the future. A lot of that has to do with trauma. If you are someone who puts a line on like what sometimes people will call capital T trauma, or identify specific categories of things that count as trauma, that's great. And if you're not, then you can use the language here. When you have an experience that you don't like, that we might call traumatic, again, you might find use in using that word, you might not. When you go through something, experience something traumatic, what that means is it's terrible. For whatever reason, there is something or many somethings about that experience that are awful for you. You automatically don't want that to happen again. A lot of what happens later on when we're talking about trauma responses is when we haven't identified enough to satisfy ourselves, not about reality. We haven't identified enough of what it is that happened to feel confident that we know why the terrible thing that happened. So now we know how to make sure that it doesn't happen again. That's what we're looking for. And pain, discomfort, negative experiences, trauma, these are different words that all fall in the same category, even though obviously there are different specifics within that realm. It all means I noticed something, I was aware of something, experienced something that wasn't good, I didn't like. When you experience something you don't like, you automatically don't want to experience it again. That's not like a sequence of events. That's just different ways of talking about the same thing. Not liking it and not wanting more of it is the same thing. That's because our brains find a lot of value in that. Oh, I ate from this bush and I ate a berry from this bush and I got really sick. I'm not going to eat a berry from that bush again. Sometimes we find clear examples like that that make it easy for us to adjust things in the future. Sometimes we say, I ate a berry from this bush on a rainy day. I better not eat any berries on rainy days again in the future because I got sick. We don't actually know. And of course, as time goes on, and especially something like this where there's medical issues involved, there's so much research being done. And there's so much research being done because we know we don't know everything about it, right? We don't actually know why the terrible experience happened. We don't actually know what specifically about the terrible experience made it so terrible. So we're looking for that stuff constantly until we feel like we know enough. And again, it's not about whether this is accurate or not. It's about whether I feel confident that, oh, either I think now that it's very unlikely that the bad thing will happen again. My confidence goes up because I've identified how to avoid it or prevent it. Or I don't know how and when and why it might happen, but I do know how to deal with it now. So the importance comes down. Either way, the anxiety decreases. So in this particular case, you're anxious, and there could be many, many reasons, of course, that you're anxious about scheduling the procedure, including things like maybe you just don't like the experience of talking to schedulers on the phone to get things scheduled. It's an anxiety-inducing experience. Maybe you feel like they're putting pressure or they need you to rush, and you don't have the time that you need to really think through your calendar or whatever it is. And if that's the case, then you can prepare for that by looking through your calendar. But of course, I just made that up, right? Maybe it's relevant to you, maybe it's not. What I'm trying to get at is that you want to identify what pieces of what is happening or what is going to happen that you're worried might happen. What pieces of it are the pieces that are bothering you, and then address those specifically. Either in doing things that you can identify, oh, if I do this, like get my calendar prepared and organize it in such and such a way, or know that I only have this date or whatever to make it likelier to go the way that I want, or in trying to reframe it as, oh, you know what, the difference between how bad it would be if it goes badly versus how good it will be if it goes well isn't as much as I thought it was. That's what a lot of people try to do with anxiety. They'll tell you, hey, don't worry about it so much. It's not that big a deal. Which sometimes is absolutely infuriating, but also sometimes works, or people wouldn't do it. Sometimes when you say, hey, it's not that big a deal, sometimes the other person's like, yeah, okay, you're right. In this case, you might want to look at, only because my only information here is that you mentioned the thing coming up, and then you mentioned the thing that happened before right next to each other. So that tells me that you already have a connection between those two things. So look at that connection. What is it? And of course, major surgery is that's the thing you're identifying as the connection. I went through a major surgery. I've got a major surgery coming up. Although you don't identify what's coming up as a major surgery, I'm inferring that you think of it that way. Otherwise, why would you reference the prior major surgery? And then you want to look maybe at what happened in the past. And I started all this by talking about trauma because some things are so traumatic that even exploring them to look for the specific details of what might have happened can be overwhelming and negative and awful. That's a big part of whatever we might call trauma causing problems later. That's a big part of why, because the experience itself was so awful that revisiting it, even conceptually, even just thinking about it, remembering it, is so awful that I can't do it. And therefore, I can't really explore the details of what about it was terrible in enough detail to be able to say, I'm not going to have that experience again. That's where working with somebody is really, really helpful, especially trauma-informed therapists. And I'm a therapist, and I believe in therapy. I think that's a great way to go, but it's also not always an option for people. And yes, you can talk about these things with other people, with friends and family members, if you feel safe with them. But you got to have some things to watch out for. Kind of like back in that first question, we want to identify, hey, if you notice this, or if I start to feel this, or if I say this or do this, I need you to do this. If I start to cry, I want you to come over and give me a hug and just tell me it's not happening right now. If I start to feel like there's bees inside of me, a hollow mannequin filled with bees, I would like for you to then say, all right, stand up. We're not doing this anymore. Come on, let's go for a walk or whatever. I can't be certain about what will work and what won't work for everybody, but I'm just trying to make some, in order to reduce your anxiety about what's coming up, a major way to be able to do that is to explore what happened, but you want to do that within the confines of safety. That's why we don't explore this stuff all the time, because it's not always safe. And yes, that's why we sometimes end up with trauma responses to things like red walls, because the walls in the room where the thing happened were red. Even though it's probably not related to what actually happened, my brain isn't investigating it that closely because the whole thing is just too scary to touch. I'm sorry that that's your experience. I mean, just all of this, anxiety is not something any of us want to deal with. Certainly anxiety connected to terrible experiences. Next question. I get very anxious when I have to drive to a new place. I have to Google until I'm sure I know where it is, what's next to it, what's past it, also what it looks like. This can take me hours and it makes me very anxious, and I might go back and do it again the day I need to make the drive. So this gets into something I call cost and value, where you have a solution to the anxiety. What your question is about is the solution, the thing that I can do in order to reduce my anxiety is very costly. I don't want to have to do something that costs me that much time, that much energy, that much awareness. The solution to the anxiety of the drive is in and of itself causing you anxiety. So we can keep going down the chain and come up with some stuff that will help with the anxiety of the solution that causes anxiety to the initial thing that you're anxious about. And we do that all the time. And or we can explore what are other things that can be done to solve that initial anxiety without having to do this specific solution. I myself, I have lots of different things that I do, but one in particular, if I am worried, and I don't always worry about this, but if I'm worried about, did I lock that door? I have a specific routine I can do when locking a door so that I'm thinking, okay, if later I'm going to ask myself, did I lock it? I'll be able to say for sure yes, because I know I did this routine. It involves slamming my body into the door about 5 to 7 times. So what solves the anxiety? What resolves the anxiety for you? There's no good solutions or bad solutions unless it's because you don't like what the solution costs you. In this case, hours and another experience of anxiety. I'm tempted to make some guesses about what might be causing the anxiety when you're driving to a new place, but I don't want to get too off base and just like throwing out random stuff. Let's say, all right, I am going to make some guesses because I hope that it is helpful, and they're guesses, and if it's not helpful, it's not helpful. Because you're saying you Google it till you're sure you know where it is, what's next to it, what's past it, and what it looks like, all of that implies to me, I'm inferring from that you're worried about missing it, that you're worried about trying to find the place and not being able to find it, and in particular about overshooting it. Because when you're saying what's past it, that implies to me that you want to be able to say, oh, I've gone too far. More so than saying what's next to it, which could be in either direction. And yes, like I said, I'm making guesses, and this is part of what I do and why I'm so specific about language. So there's not. All right, we'll start here. Drive to a new place is a thing, a way of describing something that you have to do that does match accurately many, many, many different experiences. And each of those experiences is still different from each of the others. So humans, we do a lot of what we call generalizing, which means, oh, I have found this to be the case in the past, or I have found this to be helpful in the past. And now this new thing that I'm experiencing or getting ready for seems similar enough to me to what happened in the past that I think doing what I did in the past will be useful. or that I think that the bad thing that happened in the past might happen again. Probably you have gotten lost, you have passed things quite a bit, or if not a lot, then whatever ways in which you have done it have been particularly bad experiences. Again, we can delve into that into more detail. Right now, we're talking about something that makes it so that you don't have to enact this solution, another solution that gets rid of the anxiety of the drive to the new place. Again, you can go back and look in more detail and start to identify, okay, when I have missed it or been late or whatever, what other variables were involved besides just that it was a new place? Because not every time you've gone to a new place has that happened, even before you started doing all of this, most likely. So we can start to try and get things out into a smaller subset. It's not just driving to a new place, it's driving to a new place that's more than 5 miles away, or it's driving to a new place that's in a town I've never been to before, or whatever. And you can add more and more and more of those modifiers on so that the anxiety, that experience happens less frequently instead of just every time you're driving to a new place. Another thing that you can explore is how much, and again, this is based on connections, how much is it connected to other things like being late? Are you worried about missing it because of the fact that you might then not get there on time? And if that's the case, could you leave earlier? And that starts to address some of the anxiety. And you don't have to always actually do these things to test it. You can just think, if I left an hour early and brought a picture of the place with me that I had printed out, or a screenshot of what it looks like on my phone, or if I use Google Maps on my phone or whatever on my phone while I'm driving it, will that help the anxiety? And if you think, no, maybe, then maybe it's worth giving a shot. And if you're like, no, that won't do it, I have to do all this other stuff, then there's no point in trying it if you don't think it's worth trying, right? This is a specific example of something that's actually not honestly, what am I trying to say? This is a specific example of something that is frequently actually helpful. Sometimes we'll talk about it as like scouting trips, right? If I'm anxious about going to dinner at a new restaurant, well, then maybe earlier at lunch when it's not so busy, or in the morning when it's not so busy, I'll go there and look over the menu and check it out so that later I'm not as anxious, or even look at the menu online, right? So doing scouting trips is a great strategy to try and reduce some of that anxiety unless it starts getting to this point. So, and there's not even obviously a question here, which is why I'm trying to do so much in terms of inferring what the question is. It's just a description of what's happening, and I got to start trying to move faster. Actually, the next one, me too. I get anxious also if I'm going to a new doctor somewhere. I call them and get a description of the building so I can better find places. So very similar. You want to scout if one way of looking at something like this is if you're scouting the preparation that you're doing to make it, what you're doing is you're increasing your confidence, right? That it's more likely that I will find the place that I'm trying to find because I've done all this work. We can look at this other end. That's part of what I was suggesting with leaving earlier or whatever other things. How do I make it less important that I find it right away? How do I make it less of a problem if I end up getting lost, etc.? One thing you can always explore as well is offloading some of these things onto somebody else that you trust. Because going back to my locking the door, if I'm locking the door and later I'm going to worry, did I lock the door? I don't remember. That's what my anxiety is about, is forgetting. If I ask my wife to lock the door, then later on I'm not going to worry. And I'm not saying that's always the case. I'm saying I've found that to be true for me in this instance, is if there's something, even things like I'll ask her to check on our kids after I've checked on them at night. Not every night, but sometimes. If I'm ever feeling anxious about like, are they okay in there? Then sometimes I'll ask her to go check. Because my anxiety, even more than the bad part of whatever terrible thing I'm worried might happen from not locking the door, there's an additional thing on top of that and it's my fault. If we got robbed, for example, and it was my fault, I'd feel really terrible. If we got robbed and it was my wife that didn't lock the door, then I don't really care so much. And in fact, I'm going to be more concerned about helping her to not feel bad about it being her fault, because it's not. than I am going to be about, did I do anything wrong? And I use that example of checking on the kids because I'm trying to put some higher stakes stuff out there that, yeah, the idea of something bad happening to my children in the night while I'm asleep and they're asleep and nobody knows is absolutely terrifying to me, which is why I'm checking on them in the first place. But I can't stay awake all night and watch them all the time. That's not a viable solution. And so I check on them and then I go to bed. Sometimes that works, but if that's still causing me anxiety, it can help to have her check on them, because even though it would still be absolutely horrible if something happened, at least then I don't worry, and I might still end up doing this if something happened, because again, it's not about what happens, it's about what we think. If something horrible happened, at least I'm not worried that I'm going to spend the rest of my life saying, I could have, I should have, I didn't, why did I, that I can just deal with the terrible thing that happened instead of thinking about what I should have done differently. So you can ask for help with this kind of stuff too. I'm going to move on just for time purposes, even though I feel like there's probably more I could say that's helpful there, or at least that I'd want to. Do you recommend specific medications or multivitamins? Does lavender help? So I definitely don't ever recommend specific medications or multivitamins, but especially in something like NF where it is, I'm not a doctor, that's not my specialty, I couldn't tell you. What I can say, especially when you say, does lavender help? Well, I am assuming that you're asking that question because some people have told you that lavender helps. They've either told you that lavender helped them, or they've told you that lavender will help you because it helps others, or it theoretically should, or whatever. There's some reason behind that. What I think is important or helpful to look at when you're talking about this kind of stuff, should I try X? Will this help? Oh, I just realized I'm interpreting that as NF. No, you mean specific medications or multivitamins to deal with the anxiety, in which case the answer is still no, because I don't make specific recommendations. I'm not a doctor. I don't prescribe medicine. But I just had to reframe for myself what we're talking about here. Because, yeah, lavender is something that's talked about to help anxiety. And I was thinking, I wonder how that theoretically would help NF if someone's saying that. Anyway, in the presentation that we did, we very quickly at the end went over some slides. One of those slides was 6 categories of things. So lavender is a scent. And some people, like myself, are what we'd call hyposensitive to scent. Hypo meaning not very sensitive. I don't have a very good sense of smell. I don't notice things unless they're very strong. Some people are hypersensitive to scent, meaning even the tiniest little scents that other people would mostly not notice, they notice. And things that to other people are like, yeah, that's normal, whatever, to them will be a lot. Mostly when people are talking about these sensory sensitivities, a lot of it gets talked about in auditory sensitivity. But you are sensitive, more or less sensitive to different types of data all over the place. And we can categorize that in different ways. And there's usefulness to that. To, for example, say I'm sensitive to social data, because what that tells me is I'm going to be aware now that anything that another person is doing, that I'm reading off of another person, I'm going to pay close attention to that. And that can cause me problems or it can help me. But if I'm aware that I'm sensitive to it, then I can try and plan around and utilize it. In this case, my best guess for you, I can definitively say that lavender, some people have said lavender helps them. And I can definitively say that some people say that lavender doesn't help them. So I can't say across the board. What I can say is if you're interested in it, whether it's lavender or anything else, look at the cost of trying it against the value of trying it. If it's something like, I spend $10 on some lavender scented whatever, are you willing to pay that cost? Do you think it's that likely that it will work, that it's worth spending $10 to try? But even more than that, to help identify which things are worth trying first, is look at the things that you're sensitive to. If you know that you're sensitive to smell, then using something like a lavender scent, and I am also just realizing I'm assuming scent here because that's what I've heard lavender discussed in the past, but maybe it's about eating it. I don't know. I don't know if people eat lavender, but maybe. That if you're sensitive to that type of data, it's more likely that a solution in that area will work for you. If you're having a hard time sleeping and you have sound sensitivity, then it's probably more likely that a white noise machine will do something for you than that an eye mask will do something for you. If you know that you're sensitive to visual data, it's more likely that an eye mask will do something than a sound machine. And it doesn't mean that any of these things definitively will work, but it's just about assessing what's worth trying. So the 6 categories on that slide, we did the 5 different physical, detecting stimuli from external to the body: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Underneath touch, we talked about some of the stuff that is internal to the body, things like interoception, which is the physical sense from inside the body of like how full or empty is my stomach, how full or empty is my bladder, that kind of thing. Proprioception, which is, where's my hand? I can tell where it is even without the touch, the scent, all that stuff. Vestibular, which is balance, all these different things. And then the other one was social sensitivity. I put those 6 out there because I find those to be commonly useful, but you can do this with anything. If you say, if someone's got a TV on, I'm watching it. Or actually a specific thing that people will talk about, music. I can't listen to music because if it's on, I can't focus on anything else. It just takes all my attention. Well, that person doesn't want to listen to music while they're trying to, do homework. But then the other person, I love to have music just kind of in the background while I do it. That person wants to have music on. Anxiety is the opposite. In this case, what you want is things that do pull your attention, but that aren't problems. So if a lavender scent, if you're hypersensitive to smell, if that pulls your attention out of your head and what thing you're thinking about, because it's always something that isn't in the present vicinity. Even if you identify, seeing that thing right there makes me anxious, it's because I'm worried about what might happen because of the thing. If I have to pay attention to the moment, I can't pay as much attention to what I'm thinking about, which means I can't pay as much attention to the thing that's making me anxious. So anything that pulls your attention to the moment, but that isn't itself a problem, kind of like what we're talking about with the driving thing before. Anything that works to decrease the anxiety is great, unless the thing itself also causes anxiety, then you're just trading one for the other. That still might be better, but we want to try and find something that's no anxiety at all. As far as ingesting lavender, I just totally threw my pen. As far as ingesting lavender, no idea. And I have to pick up my pen because it's the thing that I'm using is my fidget right now. And if I don't fidget, I will likely get more anxious. Because I'm going to go real fast now. Oh, no, never mind. These ones are questions that I already did answer during the webinar, but could be useful to record on the stream. And we only have 4 minutes left, so I don't... I'm laughing at the comment there. Screw this pen in particular that just flew out of my hand. This is one of my favorite fidgets, this pen. I love it. And I'll just say, okay, here's what I'll spend some of the time talking about is this pen, as opposed to repeating answers that I did during the webinar. Maybe we'll record them later. Well, 2 things. On the medications, multivitamins, I can't say what will work and I can't recommend things. I can say some about what I have heard. And one in particular that I have heard, that we have all probably heard, that can calm the nerves is tea. I think that's likely a combination of the smell of it, the taste of it, the feel of it. It's a lot of sensory input all from one thing. But I am sure that I don't know, but I imagine there's probably evidence that the contents of the tea itself, the chemicals in the tea that you ingest in some way impact your biology that makes it so that you calm more. And even if that's the case, there's a reason that different cultures have different, very specific and intricate rituals around tea. Because the more I have to focus on what is happening in front of me, the less I can think about the things that are making me anxious. So even if there's something that is helpful in there, we still design all this other stuff around it to be even more effective. But yeah, I hear people talk about tea. I hear people talk about, I don't really want to say, I'll say, I hear people talk about things like L-theanine and stuff like that, but I don't have any information about whether any of that's useful. So I don't really want to put it out here because I don't want to point you in the direction of something that I have no idea if it works or not. Medications, definitely there are medications that are prescribed for anxiety, But as far as what specifically and when they might be useful, that's something you got to talk to a doctor about. So now the last thing that I'll do with the last couple minutes that we have. Wait, is there anything other than tea that I want to say? Well, no. Yeah, okay. Because I was going to say people talk about smoking cigarettes to calm their nerves, which is not something that I do and is not something generally, to my understanding, that you want to start doing. But if you already do it and it helps you calm yourself when you're feeling anxiety, maybe that's something that you explore. Caffeine, sugar, comfort foods. I mean, we call it comfort food for a reason. There's something about it. And maybe it's the taste or the smell or the texture or a combination of all, or maybe it's the stuff that's in the food, who knows, that can help. I guess what I'm really saying is there's nothing that we can say, even the prescribed medications, we can't say this will help all people with their anxiety in exactly the same way, or at all even. It might, in fact, sometimes these things make it worse. The best studies we have are still, if you run a study and says, according to the data, 80% of cases, this thing reduces anxiety, that's a fantastic correlation. I mean, you don't often get studies higher than that with this intervention helped with this specific problem. And even then, for the 20% of people that it didn't help, doesn't matter that it helped the other 80%. And you're one person. So either you're in the 80% or you're in the 20%. That kind of stuff is helpful in terms of what is worth trying. If you're saying, generally what we want to say is, oh, this helps 80% of people, that means there's an 80% chance that it might help me. And of course, that's not actually how it works, but in terms of thinking about whether it's worth exploring. And there's a 20% chance that it won't help me. Even that's a little problematic because we tend to round. So when we get 90%, 95%, we basically think, oh, this works. And then when it doesn't work for you, you say, what's wrong with me? Why isn't this working? This is supposed to work. No, it always didn't work for 5% of people or 10% of people. You just heard 95% and thought of it as this helps people. You just happen to be one of the 5% in that case. If you're feeling anxious and you're only sleeping 4 hours a night, you might think, ooh, I should try to sleep 8 hours a night. Don't get locked in on, I have to sleep 8 hours a night in order to reduce my anxiety. Because there's a reason you're sleeping 4 hours a night. Sleeping 8 hours a night might help reduce the anxiety. It might actually not. It might reduce the anxiety because you're getting more rest, but your anxiety is getting worse because of whatever stuff you were doing with the other 4 hours that is now not getting done. It's complicated, and there's no way to know. It's just about what you try. Ooh, calligraphy, yeah. Crafting. A lot of repetitive, simple tasks. And by simple, I don't mean easy. They can be very difficult, take a lot of time and energy. By simple, I mean they don't require a lot of thought. They can require a lot of action, but as long as they don't require a lot of thought, then those can be really great ones because it pulls you into the moment. And then I'll finish up with this last thing because I said I was going to, and then we'll wrap up even though we're a minute past the hour. This pen, and I'm embarrassed to say this on stream, costs $80, I think it was. And of course, it's ridiculous to feel embarrassed. I get so much value out of this pen. I get a lot more value out of this pen than I do out of other things that I have spent more money on in the past. But, and I didn't mention this with that fourth question about the driving, like in that sense, like in that question, possibly in that question, part of what we're doing is mapping against what we think other people's experience is or what we think other people would perceive of us. I obviously don't think it's actually embarrassing to spend $80 on this pen, or I wouldn't have done it and I wouldn't say it. But I do think that other people might think that that is ridiculous. And so I'm saying it out loud because I want to be clear, hey, if you think it's ridiculous, I'm aware that it could be called ridiculous, even though I did actually think it was worth it. I spent probably a month or two researching pens because when I got my new fancy office, it's not actually that fancy, but I do love it. When I got my office and launched this practice, I don't know why, but I decided I wanted like a nice pen to kind of, be a symbolic thing for me. In this particular case, it's also a great fidget for me for many reasons. The weight, the smoothness, I like rubbing. It twists, and if you can hear, it's got just the tiniest click, which I like that part of the fidget, But if I need to, I can do it that way and still get the feeling of the click without the sound of the click. Pens are generally not noticed. So if somebody else would be bothered by me using an infinity cube or something, they're not likely to be bothered when I'm sitting here doing this, which is my most common fidget with it. There are many, many, many reasons that I love this pen. I still spent 2 months, probably on average 3 hours a week, researching pens to try and justify to myself the cost of getting this thing. A lot of what causes anxiety for people is thinking about something that might work for me, but thinking that other people wouldn't need it or would say that it is a waste or too expensive or ridiculous or I shouldn't use it, shouldn't need it. If you have an idea that something might work for you, look at the cost, look at the value, give it a shot. I have spent money on other things in the past that I thought would help that didn't return the value that something like this does to me, that this pen does for me. Sometimes I'm wrong, but that's why we're always trying to think about what's worth trying. And that's kind of my final little button as we wrap up here. A lot of what's causing anxiety is when people are asking the question, what will happen or what will work? And we can't answer either of those questions. Those are impossible questions to answer. You don't know what will happen. You don't know what will work. What you can answer is what is worth trying. So if we reframe all of this stuff from how, because even these questions, right? If I was trying to approach this from here's what will help you, this will definitely help. I couldn't answer any of these questions. I couldn't give you anything that might or may not be helpful if I'm saying to myself, I can only give you something that I know will be helpful. In other words, it becomes impossible to act, and therefore the only thing you can do is think, which is where a lot of, that's where the anxiety is in thinking about a problem that you're not actively interacting with or doing something about. Specific, not every problem, specific kinds of problems. It becomes impossible to act, and therefore all you can do is think if what you're trying to figure out is what will make this go better, what will happen. But if you're focused on what is worth trying, that you can answer because that's about your idea. All right, I think it will cost me this, and I think it's this much likely to help in this kind of a way, so I'm willing to pay that cost. That's worth trying. And then you now get to be out of your head and go try and do something. I literally spent, I don't know, maybe 20, 30, 40 hours researching pens before buying one. I have a lot of anxiety around money and spending money. I didn't have a lot of it growing up. That's a lot of anxiety. It wasn't just fun looking at pens. It was a lot of me saying, I really want that pen, but can I justify spending $80 on a pen? I don't know. That seems so exorbitant, but I want it. At a certain point, I just had to say, you know what? I've been thinking about this pen for 2 months and I have $80 in the bank, so I'm going to go get it. Even if it doesn't end up helping me the way that I think it might, or don't enjoy it the way that I think I will, at least then I will stop thinking about it constantly. And I wasn't thinking about it constantly, but every week, multiple times a week, thinking about it. Just got to do something. If it hadn't been as, helpful as it has ended up to be, well, that would have been a bummer, but I still wouldn't have been thinking about it anymore. I would have known what happened. It turns out that it is helpful. I thought it was worth trying, and it has been great. So that's nice. But I couldn't have known that. All I can know is that it's worth trying. And sometimes the cost of trying it is worth it, not only because it might help with whatever thing that you're thinking of. Sometimes the value of trying it is just that you can stop thinking about whether you should try it. That in and of itself is causing the anxiety. That the driving one there, a lot of the anxiety, obviously, seems obvious anyway in what they're saying, is coming from the amount of time and resources they're spending on it. But what if the anxiety is about, for example, why do I need to do this? Should I need to do this? What's wrong with me that I am anxious about driving some new place and therefore have to do this thing? Sometimes the anxiety compounds on itself because you're thinking about, why am I anxious? What's wrong with me? what else might this mean about me that would be terrible? Because I don't like being anxious about this. So what other things that I don't like and don't want might I also experience? And then it just snowballs. What is worth trying? What value is worth what cost? That's it. Once you have the idea, you try it. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, great, because now you know and you can move on to the next thing. I said that was the last thing, but I'll say this very last thing. People will oftentimes get stuck in thinking that these things are completable, that life itself is a series of completable tasks. Here's this thing in front of me. I got to do it and get it done and then be done with it. I never have to pay attention to it again. People think about that a lot in terms of emotions and cognition and, mental health, whatever you want to call it. I need to conquer my anxiety. I need to deal with my anxiety. I need to address my anxiety. No matter what you do, you will feel anxious again. It's going to happen. Everybody feels anxious from time to time. It's a matter of how often, how bad. We talked about all this in the presentation, right? All these different variables. If you're approaching this with, what can I do that will make it so that this is never a problem again? And you do it and it actually works, great, except that the next time that the problem comes up and you will feel anxious again, now you feel worse. It's like an addict who is relapsing. If an addict is clean for 2 weeks and then relapses, dang it. If an addict is clean for 20 years and then relapses, what is wrong with me? I just threw away 20 years. And of course, that's not true for everyone. If you shift to the mindset, instead of the goal is to be done with this and never experience it again, which makes it actually so that you feel worse. The better you're doing, the worse you feel when it fails, and it will sometimes fail. If you shift instead to the mindset of, I'm just trying to go as long as I can between relapses, I'm trying to recover from those relapses as quickly as possible, then 2 weeks, okay, good. I did 2 weeks. 20 years, oh my goodness, how amazing, right? The way I talk to people about this a lot of the time is I'm going to interrupt just because I saw the comment, help me justify spending big money on a thing that I'll actually use and that will last. I misread that as lost. Just so that you know, I have a rule for myself. I don't take this pen out of my office because I'm worried about losing it. And I want to associate it with my identity of being a counselor and just keep it in here. Anyway, here's the thing though. I keep getting this feeling in my stomach and it's like uncomfortable, unpleasant, but it grows over time and starts to become actually quite painful and difficult to ignore. And so I tell other people about this feeling because I'm trying to figure out what it is and what to do about it. And everybody tells me that they experience it too. It's called hunger, and that it's actually pretty simple to resolve. You just eat some food. So I did. I ate some food and it worked like everybody said that it would. But now I'm experiencing it again. So I don't know what's wrong with me that, eating food only worked for a little bit and I keep having this same problem. I don't know why the solution that works for everybody else isn't working for me, but help me out. What's wrong with me? What do I need to do? And don't tell me just to eat food because I tried that already and it didn't work. And obviously that is ridiculous. That's why we're using that metaphor. But we do that all the time with other things like anxiety. I experienced this thing. I talk to people about it to resolve it. They tell me it's called anxiety. And in order to resolve it, they do X, Y, or Z. And so I tried that and it didn't work. What's wrong with me? Or I tried that and it worked, but only for a little bit. Then it came back. I don't know what's wrong with me. Why? Some things you just don't get to be done with. You just address and then it comes back and then you address it again. Sometimes you have a solution that works and then that solution stops working and now you got to come up with a new one. It's not a failure when that happens. It's thank goodness you had whatever solution you had that worked for as long as it did. Now it's time to come up with a new one. Yeah, I get it. That's not fun. It's much more fun. And by the way, it makes it a lot easier to sell books and things like that. If I can say, no, use this simple process and it will never be a problem again. That's just not how it works. And I don't like giving people the impression that there's easy ways to resolve impossible things. There isn't. And if you think that there is, it makes it worse. You guys in this webinar are dealing with things. Everybody's dealing with things. You guys are dealing with some specific things that you have in common with one another that are significant, meaningful. They matter. They're important. It's not something that can be waved away or swept under the rug. There are actual things that you're experiencing that are actually terrible, painful, unpleasant, whatever. That's real. Of course it's real, and you know that it's real. And the physical element of it is real. The emotional element of it is real. The cognitive, it's all real because you're experiencing it. You don't need somebody else to look at it and agree with what you're calling it to make it real. And there are things that can be done to make it better. And unfortunately, in some cases, there are not things that can be done to make it better permanently. But that is life. Different people have different versions of it, and some of them are worse and harder than others in different ways. But it's the reality of it. There are things that just don't get resolved permanently. We just want to resolve them as much as we can for as long as we can before we have to put more of our resources into resolving it again. And I feel like that's not a very hopeful note to end on 15 minutes after we were supposed to end. But honestly, I kind of think it is. I kind of think it is hopeful and helpful, at least I hope that it is, to just be real about the fact that no, nobody else has a secret way to fix this forever that you just don't know. Not me, not anybody. And I hope that people didn't come to this presentation with the idea that I'd be able to say, follow these 5 simple steps and you'll be fine forever. Because if that's what you were hoping for, I have disappointed you, and I'm sorry about that. But I hope that I gave a lot of things that are at least worth exploring, or at least help you to look at it in a different way that might be helpful to you. And if nothing else, I hope that it is helpful to think of it as you're experiencing this because you're human, not because you're broken. You might be experiencing more of it than you like. You definitely are. You might be experiencing more of it than other people. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Certainly you're experiencing it more than some people, but also less than others. But you're experiencing it, and it is human. And yeah, it sucks to have to deal with. But you're not only dealing with it because you're doing it wrong, and other people who somehow are doing it right don't have to deal with it. They don't have to deal with it as much or in the same way or whatever. But you're not doing it wrong. You're just trying to figure it out. Same as me, same as everybody else. I was trying to switch that around to being a more hopeful note to end on. I don't know if I actually did that or if that was just sad again, but I hope it's helpful. I really do. All right, here we are, 15 minutes after the hour. I got to go. Thank you all for being here. We'll be back next week, same time, same place, Wednesday, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Central Time. Thank you all, and see you next week.